everyone, welcome to another edition of What Went Wrong, where I take a look at professional wrestling's history, pick out one event, one storyline, one happening that took place, and evaluate why that thing went wrong, how it could have worked, and why it probably wasn't as good as it should have been. Now, before I jump into all that, though, I do want to talk about this week's NXT, which debuted on USA Network, and give my overall impressions of the first show. I thought the portion on USA was good. I thought having a title change on there was good. I thought the four-way was really good. Not as expository as I expected it to be. I expected more vignettes and promos to kind of get some of these guys over for a new audience. Instead, it was pretty much just wall-to-wall action. And to that end, I thought it worked. The problem was where you get to the second hour, which was on the network, which I completely forgot that was happening, but apparently for the next few weeks, the second hour of NXT is going to be airing on WWE Network. And I'm like, a little herky-jerky there. I know that USA is still filming, or still airing Suits, and there's like 3 episodes left. So that's why this is the current situation. But I thought the transition from hour 1 to hour 2 was a little herky-jerky. You know, you had that great 4-way to start things off. You had the really good match with Roderick Strong and Velveteen Dream with the title change. And then you get matches on the second hour that don't quite live up to it, and it just kind of felt like a downer from what in the first hour was this really exciting hour of television. So it kind of felt like a tack on, I guess is the best way to sum it up. Not that all of it was bad. I thought the Lio Rush Oney Lorcan match was solid. I thought the cool that they debuted Walter, but then bad that Kushida got over on him and the Imperium. Not a good showcase for a heel faction when you have 4 guys there and then one guy who's like half the size of their smallest dude, and he gets over on all 4 of them and escapes unscathed. I'm like, man, not a fan of that. But the brawl at the end was random as hell, and that didn't really work for me. That felt like something out of the TNA playbook. But it's a shame we didn't get the Matt Riddle. We didn't really get the Matt Riddle Killian Dane match out of that. So. Second hour, a little herky-jerky. The transition from hour 1 to hour 2, a little herky-jerky. I even think the second hour went short. It only went like 51 minutes or something. So, but hopefully those problems are cleared up when the full 2-hour show airs on USA, and we'll get a better idea of what the show's going to look like moving forward. But as is, I'd call the first night overall a success. And with all that out of the way, let's jump right into the topic of this edition of What Went Wrong. The WWF Championship reign of the Ultimate Warrior, which went from April of 1990 to January of 1991. Now, much has been said about this title reign, and I'm going to provide a little background, a couple of historical goodies for those of you who might not be up to date with it, maybe you're a little too young, don't remember the Ultimate Warrior, weren't around when the Ultimate Warrior was on top. But speaking as someone who was 5 years old when he first won the title, I've got pretty vivid memories of when Ultimate Warrior was champion, and Ultimate Warrior's run with the WWF in general. Now, it has been said by many in the past. Bruce Pritchard really sticks out in my mind as saying it recently in some of his podcasts, that the Ultimate Warrior's run was a failure. He was not the draw that Hulk Hogan was, and his reign as a main event star was ultimately a flop. This was built upon in the Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior DVD, where it was called A Flash in the Pan, and everything else that you could possibly imagine. Now, speaking as a fan at the time, at that young of an age, 5 years old, I was actually not a fan of the Ultimate Warrior, because in my 5-year-old brain, I was a Hogan fan, and that jerk beat Hogan, so fuck him, or whatever the 5-year-old equivalent of fuck him is. That's what I was saying. I distinctly remember WrestleMania 6, when he beat Hogan, and I didn't cry or anything. I've talked to some kids that cried. I sat there in my chair with my arms crossed, and I was just seething and just scowling at the TV when I watched it. And I didn't even see it live. I watched it, I got the tape from a friend of mine a couple days after the event, and I already had the ending spoiled for me. I didn't believe him. I was like, no, Hogan won, you're lying. That's not true, you're lying. And then I saw it, and I'm like, that's not cool. But yeah, that was my opinion of the Ultimate Warrior as a kid. So I want to make it clear, I was not a fan of the guy when I was young. As I've gotten older, and even with all the bad stuff that's been said about him, all the awkwardness surrounding him giving his homophobic comments, shall we say, I will say that I look back on Warrior, I get it. Like, I get why he was over. I get why he was pushed. I get why kids liked him. He was this crazy off the wall character that looked like every metal album come to life, and was just a one of a kind, once in a lifetime type of wrestling character. So I get it. Even with his physical limitations and his limitations as a worker, I completely understood why he got the push that he got. With his look, his character, the music, the presentation, all of it. And um, I look back on his run in the WWF. He had some really good feuds, really, really good feuds, which is actually going to be kind of the linchpin of my defense of Ultimate Warrior as champion. In '89, he had that great feud with Rick Rude over the IC title, and really helped get him ready for Hogan. He also had the series of matches with Andre, which weren't that great, admittedly, but it was still a guy beating Andre the Giant, so it helped get him over. But I remember in particular the feud with Rick Rude being one that really elevated him. Um, the stuff he did with Randy Savage at WrestleMania 7, I've said on this channel is my favorite WrestleMania match of all time. The stuff he did with The Undertaker in '91, what a great feud that was. Two, larger-than-life characters and personas going at each other. Really, really good stuff. One of the better feuds and storylines they had going that year. It's a shame that they never had a pay-per-view match. One of my criticisms of SummerSlam '91 is that we didn't get Undertaker and Warrior in a match. I think that would have been, whether it be a tag match with Hogan and Jake involved or a one-on-one between Warrior and Undertaker, I think it would have been a way bigger and cooler attraction than just having Hogan and Warrior go up against Slaughter again. No knock on Sarge. I love Sarge, but the main event to SummerSlam '91, my first ever wrestling pay-per-view, didn't quite work for me. But basically what I'm trying to say is, there was some stuff that Warrior did that worked really, really well, and he had some good storylines. He had some good feuds. And they typically put him in the ring with guys that could work around him and work around his limitations, and you could get some really good stuff out of it. Like I said, the stuff with Savage, the stuff with Rick Rude. The match with Hogan at WrestleMania 6, which is still one of my favorite WrestleMania matches of all time. One of the biggest main events, anyway, with two larger-than-life baby faces going at it with both belts on the line. It was a larger-than-life event and was a can't-miss match for all the fans of both guys. And it basically forced the fans to kind of pick a side. But as has been documented, once Warrior got the torch passed to him, when Hogan put him over, and he became the champion and he had to be the leader of the WWF, there's been, I've heard Hogan say it. I've heard Bruce Pritchard say it. I've heard many guys say it, that Warrior couldn't carry the ball the way Hulk Hogan did. And I'm sure that's a lot of personality faults with the Warrior that caused some of that feeling. I've heard plenty of stories about Ultimate Warrior. Ted DiBiase told a couple that I'm sure he was very tough to deal with. But then there's the talk of he didn't draw as champion. There was a huge drop-off once Hogan lost and Warrior got the belt. And, his houses didn't draw as well as Hogan's did. There was, all the talk of, there were two tours. There was the Hogan team and the Warrior team on the live event circuit. And everybody wanted to be on the Hogan side because it was guaranteed to get a better house. Things like that. Now, where I'm going to, while I agree that that was certainly a thing that took place, I'm going to defend Warrior a little bit and make this point and say that it's not entirely his fault. Again, I'm sure he had personality flaws that got in his own way. I don't doubt that at all whatsoever. And there's been a lot of negative things said about the Ultimate Warrior over the years, before he died even, and even after he died, I've heard some things. And I'm sure a lot of it is true. But what I will say in Warrior's defense as champion, and why that reign didn't go as well as it should have, is that there was no real hot feud for him after he won the title. Part of the problem with building up two Superman baby faces that beat everybody, between Warrior and Hogan, they pretty much chewed up and spat out everybody. Warrior, he beat Honky Tonk Man, who was a, red hot heel, longest reigning IC champion of all time. Warrior chewed him up and spat him out. Rick Rude beat him at Mania, but then Warrior got his revenge, beat him, done. Hogan beat Bundy, Paul Orndorff. Never really beat Piper, but Piper never really beat him either, so it was kind of, He won the WrestleMania 1 tag match, so he got over on Piper more than Piper got over on him, for sure. Both of them beat Andre. Hogan beat Ted DiBiase. Bad News Brown, Haku, Barbarian, all the heels you could possibly imagine. All of them got fed to either Hogan, Warrior, or both. Randy Savage was, Zeus, the latest victims of the Hogan buzzsaw prior to WrestleMania 6. And by the time both of them were done chewing up everybody and spitting them out, they pretty much burned through all the heels, and by the time Warrior was champion, there was nobody on his level that could potentially work with him. The only heel they really built up that was new was Earthquake, and they gave him to Hogan. And granted, I really enjoyed that storyline with Hogan and Earthquake, but come SummerSlam, you would think that, okay, we built up Earthquake as this unstoppable monster, maybe Warrior should face him, and no, it was Hogan that got the Earthquake match, and Ultimate Warrior got stuck working with Rick Rude, which doesn't sound so bad. I mean, Rick Rude is a great worker. One of the best heels of his era. I love Rick Rude. But the problem is, like I said, Warrior already beat him, and their feud heading into SummerSlam 1990, while the cage match itself was solid, it was also, it kind of felt like a retread almost. Like, we saw it last year and it was better when it was for the IC title. Now, if you take an IC title feud and then try to do it again for the world title, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to get Triple H and The Rock, where it seems to elevate it, and they do even bigger and better things than they were doing for the IC title, or you get like Dolph Ziggler and Kofi Kingston, where you spam it to holy hell for the IC title, and I see the match 9 million times, and then when they do it again for the WWE title, which who cares? I've seen the match 8 million times. It wasn't that great for the IC title, and now it's being done for the WWE title, and I don't give a shit. So, those are typically how it turns out. And I would say that Warrior and Rude, while I did enjoy the cage match at SummerSlam, and their feud was nowhere near as overexposed as Kofi and Dolph, I did think it kind of felt like a retread. It didn't feel like something fresh, new, or someone that would be a legitimate threat to Warrior. The first person that Ultimate Warrior worked with after WrestleMania was Ted DiBiase. Now, I love Ted DiBiase. I am not putting him down at all, and I think as far as a worker goes, he is a reliable hand to put in there with Ultimate Warrior to, again, hide the weaknesses and get a good match out of him. The problem is that, again, Ted DiBiase is one of those guys that got thrown through the Hogan buzzsaw. He got thrown through the Randy Savage buzzsaw. So by the time he gets to Warrior, okay, I mean, if he can't beat Hogan and Savage, he's not going to beat Warrior. And sure enough, that's how that goes. And there was just no real hot feud for Warrior during his tenure as champion. No real Survivor Series. He's working against Mr. Perfect just to give him somebody to work with. He's tagging with the Road Warriors against Demolition because Road Warriors need a third person because it's a 2-on-3 situation. And it never felt like Warrior had that real defining rivalry or program to define his run as champion. He was just the guy carrying the belt. And I've always believed, people always say it's like, you get to a point where you're such a draw that it doesn't matter who you put in the ring with. And I've heard people reference the episode of Saturday Night's Main Event where Hogan went in there against the Genius, or Hogan worked with Sika and it was going to draw. It didn't matter who Hogan was up against. To a degree, I understand that, but at the same time, you look at the Sika match and you look at the Genius match, those were also during a period of like, Hogan was in the middle of something red hot. He was getting ready to face Ultimate Warrior, just coming off the hot program with Savage and Zeus. So that was just kind of a bump in the road of a much larger story that was going on. There were things for Hogan to do, and this was just a bump in the road. Sika match, the Mega Powers were being set up, and the Ted DiBiase thing was just getting started. Those were like the intriguing things that kept Hogan interesting. So you could throw him in there against someone like a Sika, who's no real threat to him, but you'll watch it because you want to see if there is any kind of storyline development and those other more interesting things. Austin, he benefited from, the rivalry with Brett, which was great. Then working with Shawn heading into WrestleMania 14, which was great. The stuff with Owen over the broken neck situation, which was great. And then after he won the title at WrestleMania, and the whole deal with Mike Tyson, which was awesome, he had Vince McMahon waiting in the wings to kind of screw him over, and they could do all the stuff with Foley, and then Kane, and then Rock. There were interesting things waiting for Austin. He was never, expected to be, well, you're the guy holding the belt, so you should be able to make chicken salad out of chicken shit. And unfortunately, Ultimate Warrior was kind of expected to make chicken salad out of chicken shit. And again, I'm not putting down Ted DiBiase. I'm not putting down Rick Rude. I'm not putting down Mr. Perfect. I think those are great, great talents that were, I don't want to say hindered, but maybe they were not on Warriors level, and they were not put on. They were not put up as believable threats to the Ultimate Warrior. Not at that point. Not after he beat Hogan, and after Hogan beat most of them. So none of those guys were really threats to him, and that's what Ultimate Warrior was really lacking, was a real threat. And then eventually there was the Sergeant Slaughter situation, which led to that great title change at Royal Rumble 1991. One of the best executed heel title wins of all time, where Slaughter won the belt. Almost entirely because of Howard Finkel's announcement. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's flipping great how they pulled it off. So that stuff was really good, but again, that was just kind of like, all right, this is how we're wrapping it up. We're putting him up against Slaughter. Because we've kind of stumbled onto this hot heel with Sergeant Slaughter, and it was like Warrior was just kind of being thrown to the side. To set up his great feud with Macho Man, which was even better than anything he did as champion. And so Hogan could work with Slaughter and be the babyface that takes him down. So it was just kind of like, it felt like, in this weird roundabout way, Warrior was a transitional champion from Hogan to Hogan. If that makes any sense at all. It was this weird, like, he was the top face in name only until they decided to give the crown back to Hogan. Kind of how it felt, anyway, especially when I look back on it. And it's a shame, because if you look at Warrior in 91, the stuff with Randy Savage was awesome. The stuff with Undertaker was great, and it's like, that's the feud he needed when he was champion. When I look back on the feud with Undertaker, and they did the bit where Undertaker locked him inside the casket, I was like, that's what he needed when he was the title holder. That's what Ultimate Warrior needed. He needed, like, that major, larger-than-life threat that could feel like he could actually beat the Ultimate Warrior. DiBiase wasn't that guy in 1990. Rick Rude wasn't that guy in 1990. But The Undertaker, in 91, up against the Ultimate Warrior, yeah, that's a threat. And he was a threat to Hogan, which is why the situation heading into Survivor Series 91 that year was so interesting. Match itself wasn't great. I'm not saying it was a good match, but the situation they created was very interesting, because it was like, oh my god, I think Hogan's screwed here. How's it going to be Undertaker? And it was kind of the same thing with Warrior, where, oh my god, this guy seems like he's actually a match for the Ultimate Warrior. And, that's what Warrior was lacking as champion. He just didn't have that really hot heel to really help give him the rivalry to really define his tenure as champion. Because, as they say, great heroes are defined by the obstacles they overcome. And Warrior just didn't have anybody lined up for him. And between him beating everybody and Hogan beating everybody leading into WrestleMania 6, by the time you get to Warrior as the champion, they just had nothing. They just did not have anything set up for him. So his run as champion was largely forgettable. And, there was a drop-off in money. And, I think there were other extenuating circumstances, like the steroid scandal and wrestling just not being as hot anymore, and various other things that were coming out that led to kind of a downward turn for the WWF. But I think what Warriors championship reign was really lacking was strong creative. They just didn't have anything lined up for him. And it's one of those things where, I always used to hear that Vince would book everything from WrestleMania to WrestleMania. And I think at one time that was probably true, but I look at 1990 to 1991, I'm like, I don't know who the hell they were going to give. Let's say they'd considered running with Ultimate Warrior all the way to WrestleMania 7. I mean, who would you have put up against him for the title? I'd heard rumors that it was going to be Warrior and Hogan again, but they decided not to do that. Maybe the Savage program would have worked if the title was on the line. They could have done something great there. But as is, though, it just kind of felt like an empty title reign, because it kind of felt like Hogan Light, where it's like, all right, I beat Ted DiBiase. Hogan already beat him, and Savage already beat him, so it's like we're kind of just retreading here. He beat Rick Rude at SummerSlam. It's like, he's already beat Rude at the last SummerSlam, so it's like, it's not really a big deal. And he was a champion that never really found his place. And I think, you look at the stuff surrounding his title reign, whether it be in '89, the stuff with Rick Rude, the stuff with Honky Tonk even, And in 91, the stuff with Savage and the stuff with Undertaker, it's like, damn, where the hell was that stuff when he was actually holding the belt? That's what he needed. But it's unfortunate that things played out the way that they did, and Warrior's kind of remembered as like a flash in the pan and not being a very good champion. I'm like, well, and I'm sure some of that is his fault given his personality, but I'm also willing to defend him. It's like, okay, parts of it are probably his fault. However, I saw what was being done on TV and it wasn't great, and that kind of defined uh, Warrior's run as champion. I can make a similar criticism of Savage's run, where he didn't really have that hot of a program either while he was champion, but even then, I was like, you did have like the rise and fall of the Mega Powers, which, as I've said before, is the best storyline, arguably the best storyline in WWF history. So even though Savage didn't have like that defining pay-per-view title defense, or like a whether it be a SummerSlam match with Ted DiBiase or a big match at Survivor Series with a Bad News Brown or something like that, he did have, you knew the Mega Power split was coming, so you knew a match with Hogan was coming, and that storyline was really well crafted and really well done. So at least he had that. But Warrior just had nothing. He just was kind of left to kind of be like, all right, be the champ and go win matches. And it's like, and there was just nothing to it. And it's unfortunate because I think that character and that personality, there's plenty of stuff you can do with him at a main event level that would be interesting and fun and could create a great program. Case in point, look at the stuff with Savage, look at the stuff with Undertaker. But in any case, that concludes this edition of What Went Wrong. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and hopefully you all continue to enjoy your weekend. I've got plenty more videos lined up for you, so be on the lookout for those. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the little bell icon so you get notified when my videos are posted, and be sure to post your comments down below. I do typically respond to comments, so be sure to do that. But that is all I have for you now. Thanks again, everyone, for watching, and I will see you all later.